Welcome, ACE USMLEers. My name is Zuk Azalishvili and I'm the founder of ACE USMLE. ACE USMLE is an online podcast for the highest yield basic science and clinical knowledge tested on USMLE Step 1 and USMLE Step 2 CK. The information discussed in this podcast is intended only for educational purposes. It's not intended to prevent, diagnose, or to treat the medical conditions in real clinical practice, nor is it intended to reflect the policy and the guidelines of various health institutions. Simply put, we serve you to butcher your STEP exams. Please subscribe to our podcast, Facebook, Instagram pages, and the YouTube channels down below in the description of this episode so that we keep you tuned for the news at ACE USMLE. Now, let's start rolling. Today we'll talk about the resources, general strategies, and the timeline for both USMLE Step 1 and Step 2 CK. First of all, let's address the question that I get multiple times. People ask, which resources should we use? And I totally understand the confusion of all of us, the medical students, because there are many highly rated and high quality resources, and it's very hard to choose among them. And the main mistake that most of us do is that we choose a lot of resources and we think that the more textbooks we cover and the more videos we watch, the more we know. But that's not necessarily true. And this phenomenon that I talk to you about right now is something called information bias. And let me explain this, because information bias is also a tested concept on USMLE Step 1 and Step 2 CK. Information bias is when the person thinks that the more he or she knows, the better and faster he can diagnose the patient and treat the patient. But that's not necessarily true, because the more we know, the more time we need to spend studying to master that knowledge to then navigate through it easier. Therefore, I would highly suggest that you choose a few resources and then spend time to master only those resources that you have already chosen. And let's now start talking about the absolute must-to-do resources for Step 1. And these are two. This is the first aid for the USMLE Step 1, which is the main textbook for preparation for the Step 1, and it's the UWorld. And let's start talking about the first aid book. The first point is that the newest version you use, the better it is, because they add the new content time by time, year by year, and you want to know all of that new information that's included in the newest edition. Therefore, if the newest edition of the first aid for the USMLE Step 1 is, let's say, released shortly before your exam date, skim through the newest edition and take the notice at the information that has been added compared to the previous edition. At the same time, it's very good if you make notes inside the first aid, because in this way you will have just one book which will consolidate all the knowledge that you gain from multiple various resources. For example, the test books and the question banks and, let's say, the videos and etc. Additionally, there is one point which I would like to address in this episode. Some of us think that going through the first aid sections multiple times is a path to a higher score, but that's not necessarily true. Going through the first aid sections multiple times is not necessarily beneficial, because reading through the first aid from cover to cover is a passive way of learning. In passive learning, I mean simply reading and recalling the facts. In contrast, the active learning is solving the questions, making mistakes, and learning on your own mistakes. And I personally have covered each section of the first aid for USMLE Step 1 only twice. First, at the time when I was new to the concept and new to the organ system or the subject, and then I covered each of them at the second time when I wanted to consolidate and strengthen my knowledge. As for the USMLE Step to CK, the first aid for USMLE Step to CK book is actually not a must to do textbook, because you can gain that information from these resources like educational medical videos, for example, Online MedEd and also Boards and Beyonds. But since many people use first aid for the USMLE Step to CK, I have extensively explored this book and I think that it's very, very well structured. So if you have already started using the first aid for CK, please don't stop it, because this book is really going to help you. This was about the first aid books for USMLE Step 1 and USMLE Step 2 CK. Now let's focus on the UWorld. And there is one single golden rule about the UWorld, which pertains to both USMLE Step 1 and Step 2 CK. You must absolutely, unequivocally have done UWorld completely at least once. And at the same time, I highly suggest that you read the explanations, because without reading the explanations, just solving the questions won't help you that much. I understand that most of us have hard time transitioning from solving the questions to reviewing them, because you go from active learning, which is solving questions, to the passive learning and the passive tempo, which is extensively reviewing them. But it is very, very essential. Another question is, should we read all the explanations from the UWorld? Well, here's my answer. It depends on your baseline pool of knowledge. Let's say that you are solving question X. If you answered this question because you excluded all the wrong options logically based on your knowledge, it means that you know that topic and you don't necessarily have to read the explanation of that question at all. However, if you completely guessed the right answer, or if you have had the educational guess or some options look totally unfamiliar for you, then please read the whole explanation. Another issue with the UWorld is whether we need to go through the UWorld twice and 3 times and 4 times. And there's no one formal answer about this. Some people go through the UWorld multiple times, but I personally don't particularly approve of going through the UWorld multiple times. I have gone through the UWorld of both Step 1 and Step 2 CK only once. I mean, I have gone through all the questions only once, but I have definitely solved my incorrectly answered question. And doing the UWorld multiple times does not necessarily translate into the higher score. However, some people still use this strategy. It's a proven strategy, and for some people it really culminates in a significantly high score. But still, when we do the UWorld multiple times, then solving the questions becomes the exercise of our memory rather than exercise of our thinking. And the idea is that both USMLE Step 1 and Step 2 CK, and especially Step 2 CK, is about thinking, not memorizing. Additionally, I would suggest that you make flashcards from the UWorld about the high yield concepts, but please don't save every single picture or the diagram of the UWorld as a flashcard, because in the end you won't have time to review all of those flashcards. And there is one news about the UWorld which I would like to share with you. UWorld has added a new feature called My Notebook, which is automatically structured according to the organ systems and specialties, and you can save the diagrams and the texts in that notebook as well. Now let's talk about the other resources different from the first aid and the UWorld. And the first one is Anki. First of all, what is Anki? Anki is the program which consists of decks and cards. The deck is the collection of multiple cards, while card is just one specific piece of information which tests your knowledge. And Anki is based on one principle, which is called spaced repetition. Spaced repetition means that Anki will remind you of the same card time by time with progressively increasing the time intervals so that it finally sticks to your mind. But here is one thing. If you decide to use Anki, you should be consistent. In other words, in order for spaced repetition to work, you have to do Anki consistently. For example, every day, every other day. And please do not download many decks. Make a research about which deck contains the highest yield information and do only those decks, because having many decks is simply overwhelming and you probably won't be able to finish all of them. Another question that people commonly ask me is, should we do the questions or should we go back to reading textbooks? And there is no one definitive answer about this question, but here is my answer. It depends on your knowledge specifically. Because if you don't know the certain concepts, doing the questions makes no sense. You should certainly go back and read more about that concept. But if you feel comfortable about the particular concept, then going back and reading through the first aid or the other textbook multiple times has no benefit either. So you should do the questions in this case. And to summarize, you should balance reading and also doing the questions. As for the other resources, I really do not want to advertise for or against any of them, but I will tell you one useful strategy. Go back to the First Aid for USMLE Step 1 book cover and you will see all the resources there. Certainly consider using the resources which are rated as A plus and A, and then if you still need to fill up your resource list, then go on to the resources which are rated as A minus and B plus. One important notice though, just the fact that a resource is rated as B plus or B does not mean that it's a bad resource. It simply means that it did not work well for those people who used them and then took part in the first aid survey about the resources. Therefore, my point is that you can still try out the resources which are rated as B plus or B. And now let's summarize this part of our episode about the resources. I would highly suggest that you do not choose many resources because in this case you probably will not be able to do all of them with high quality. Now we will discuss the timeline and the general strategies for Step 1 and Step 2 CK. Firstly, I would highly recommend that you write out the plan for the whole preparation period of the exam. For example, let's say you have 12 months before your test date. One potential plan looks like this. During the first 5 months, you read the textbook or textbooks, you watch the medical videos, and you make notes in your first aid. For the next 2 months, you do question bank X, which should be different from the UWorld. For the next 2 months, you do the question bank Y, which should also be different from the UWorld, and for the last 3 months, you do the UWorld. Please keep in mind that this plan is not universal. I strongly suggest that you write your own plan. The plan depends on how much knowledge you have, and therefore, if your knowledge is not that strong, you might need more time on the textbooks. But if your knowledge is very strong, then you can certainly spend more time on the question banks. Therefore, I would like to ask you to modify your schedule based on how you want it to be and to customize the schedule to you. There is one more question that I'm asked very commonly. It is, how many hours do I study when I am in a dedicated period? First of all, let's start explaining what dedicated period is. Dedicated period simply is the time period when you study solely for step 1 or step 2 CK, or for all intents and purposes, any other exam. There is no formal amount of hours per day to study which will earn you high points on the USMLE exams. In other words, if you can study for 12 to 13 hours a day, do it. But if 12 hours is not productive for you, then you should probably try 10 hours or 8 or 7 hours. This is totally up to you. Dedicated period should last approximately 1 month or 1.5 months, because if it lasts longer, then you simply burn out. Try to exercise during your prep time. This is also a very, very important advice from me. And especially try to exercise physically during your dedicated period, because it is really easy to burn out at this time. Also, I recommend that you stop studying 2 days before the exam, approximately 2 days, because you will probably not gain the knowledge that will dramatically change your score in 2 days. Simply try to relax and spend time doing whatever you love to do. On the day before exam, try to get yourself tired in order to fall asleep easily and get a good night's sleep, because many people report that they have pre-test anxiety and nervousness and agitation, and this prevents them from sleeping. But if you get tired the day before your exam, then you will most likely fall asleep easier. Additionally, I would suggest that you try to avoid the sleep medications, for example, melatonin, ramelteone, and other sleep medications the night before exam, because you might feel unrefreshed or mentally blurred in the morning of the exam if you take the sleep pill the day before. As for the amount of sleep before the exam day, it depends on your natural biologic clock. For me personally, 7 hours is enough, but some people require more sleep while other people require less. So eventually it's up to you. And in the morning of your exam, I suggest that you work out for 30 minutes and do yoga for 30 minutes to awaken your body and mind. I have done these 2 things for both steps, and they definitely proved me right. Finally, on the test day, convert your nervousness to excitement. Don't be worried. I don't want you to be worried. Be excited for the exam. And eventually, we teach how to write the USMLE style questions on our classes at USMLE. So if you're interested, please reach out to us and we will make you a decent question writer. We have come to an end of our today's episode, and let's summarize everything that we have discussed today. Main take-home messages of our today's episode are: choose only a few resources and master them. First Aid and UWorld are absolute must-to-do resources for USMLE Step 1. If you decide to do Anki, please do it consistently. Write out a plan for your preparation time. Personalize your workout and the sleep schedule. I recommend that you stop studying 2 days before your exam. And finally, on the exam day, kick the freaking ass. You can leave the voice message on this episode to let us know how we can improve our podcast for you. So thank you for your kind attention, USMLEers, and see you on the next episode.